Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana, 104.5 FM, and UPTV. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I am here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU or UCIMC, or, as we like to say on the televised version of this show, UPTV. These views are our own, and by our, in this instance, I mean myself, if not any of the opinions that will leak through from the various news pieces that I will be reading to you. So, we're back again. More COVID quarantine reporting, guerrilla reporting here from this undisclosed location somewhere in the greater Illinois area, the Midwest area. Anyway, more information about immigration and more talk about that. So I'm just going to jump right in and start reading stuff. And this one is entitled, Trump Eviscerates U.S. Asylum System in Proposed Rule. The National Immigrant Justice Center, or NIJC, categorically rejects the Trump administration's newest proposed rule that threatens to deal a fatal blow to the U.S. asylum system, which has already suffered 3 years of coordinated attacks. This regulatory wall would block access to protection for people and families fleeing persecution. Quote, this proposed rule is an illegal and naked attempt by the president to attack immigrants and refugees and try to distract Americans from his failure to lead the country through a global pandemic, which has cost over 100,000 lives, and from his violent attacks on peaceful protesters demanding racial justice, said NIJC Executive Director Mary Meg McCarthy. Asylum seekers are children, adults, and families that our government is sworn to welcome and protect, not political scapegoats to target every time poll numbers plummet. The proposed rule would ban all claims to asylum arising out of gender-based harm, affecting countless women and LGBTQ asylum seekers fleeing horrific violence. Ban all claims to asylum arising out of gang violence and recruitment, despite an internationally recognized crisis that has propelled Central American nations to war-level murder rates due to gang violence. Ensure fast-track deportation for asylum seekers by drastically raising the burden they face to prove their claims in their initial interviews. Annihilate claims of well-founded fear of future persecution by including a perverse requirement that applicants show direct failure of their government to intervene, and breach confidentiality requirements that enable asylum seekers to safely disclose their fears and the violence they suffer to asylum officers and judges, likely chilling countless people from sharing their stories. While the worst impact will be felt by Central American asylum seekers, whom the administration clearly is trying to ban entirely, this proposed regulation would create insurmountable barriers for all asylum seekers, even for political asylum claims that have long been recognized under U.S. law, said NIJC Associate Director Ashley Hubner. Before this rule takes effect, it is subject to a 30-day comment period during which organizations and community members can submit their concerns to the Federal Register. NIJC is preparing comments calling for immediate rescission of this proposed rule, which violates decades of U.S. and international law. Moving on. Concerns about scientist immigration to the U.S. have amplified during the COVID-19 pandemic. Trump adds new visa restrictions as anti-immigration rhetoric has risen. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused research disruptions and career delays for many chemistry graduate students and postdoctoral scholars worldwide. But in the U.S., scientists were already worried about the effect that Donald Trump's administration is having on the flow of people coming into the country to study or work. Some are concerned that the pandemic is making the situation worse. In the U.S., concerns about immigration have amplified. International student applications to the U.S. have declined since Trump took office, according to the Council of Graduate Schools. The drop in applications is something that most experts attribute to anti-immigrant rhetoric from the administration. The White House has moved beyond rhetoric during the pandemic. On June 22nd, Trump issued a temporary ban on H-1B and other non-immigrant visas, often used by companies and universities to hire international scientists, including postdocs. He also extended a previous order that halted processing of some green card applications for permanent residency. In addition, Trump has issued a vaguely worded executive order limiting visitors associated with China's military-civil fusion strategy. He also shut down some flights from China to the U.S. In Congress, a bill sponsored by several Republicans would stop immigration from China altogether. Those moves could have a significant impact on scientists' ability to get visas at the same time that closed borders and consulates, along with canceled flights, are keeping them from traveling. Schools outside the U.S. are taking advantage of resulting uncertainty, says University of Chicago chemistry professor Wei-Jing Tan. One example she has seen: a Hong Kong university is advertising for PhD students and postdocs, even though it isn't their usual hiring season. They're opening up slots to recruit students and postdocs who were scheduled to come to the U.S., she said. In addition, attacks on Chinese scholars are of particular concern to scientists given the large number of students and postdocs in science fields, including chemistry, who historically have come to the U.S. for training. Contributing to the unease are the U.S. Department of Justice's efforts to prosecute scientists who collaborate with China, an initiative started as part of a larger U.S.-China trade war. Peter Kilpatrick, provost of the Illinois Institute of Technology, or IIT, says his school has seen declining enrollment from China. The Chinese government does overreach in its technology-gathering efforts, he says, but the vast majority of the people in China are not associated with the government, and they're not responsible for espionage and intellectual property theft, etc. So the question is, where do you draw the line? How do you parse who to throw the doors open to and who to say, we need to be careful? Many universities are particularly concerned about rumored threats to optional practical training, or OPT, which allows students and postdocs to extend their student visas to do internship or work in the U.S. For science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEM students, visas may be extended up to 3 years under OPT. Trump has so far not restricted OPT extensions, although he could still do so in the future. At IIT, loss of OPT would be a threat to the institution itself, Kilpatrick says. The school relies on tuition from its large number of master's degree programs. If OPT goes away, we lose all of our international students. I mean, what would be their motivation for coming, he asks. Many people come to the U.S. because they can combine getting a degree with a chance to get work experience and gain connections in the U.S. Without that, it could be the death knell for higher education in this country, Kilpatrick says. Chuang He, a University of Chicago chemistry professor, says loss of OPT would be a pure disaster. OPT provides a critical opportunity at a key time in international scientists' career for them to transition from one job to another, and it is vital to keep highly trained students with critical skills in the country. He says, we want them to stay, right? Computational and theoretical chemist Varun Rishi used OPT to work as a postdoc after he got his PhD at the University of Florida, first at Virginia Tech, and then, since October 2019, at the California Institute of Technology. In February, Rishi went to visit his family in India, and now he's stuck there, working remotely on a desk set up in a bedroom. He hopes he gets to return to Caltech soon. If not, that means that I spent more than half of my time out of the country and outside of the lab. That's going to affect everything, he says. Rishi says Caltech was transitioning him from OPT to an H-1B visa, but that is now even more up in the air after Trump's most recent immigration ban. Even before the announcement, Rishi was worried about new U.S. immigration restrictions. Many of the things that you don't think would happen are happening. Well, As an editorial aside, we live here in Champaign-Urbana. That's where WRFU is stationed, and Urbana Public TV is stationed in Champaign-Urbana area. And so our largest single entity that sort of constitutes the identity of these dual communities would be the University of Illinois. And the number of Chinese students and foreign students there is huge. I don't know the exact numbers, but I know it's far more than Americans. I believe it to be far more than the American students that are there. Maybe I'm incorrect about that, but I think it's like 2/3 or something like that. I should look that up before I state that is the case categorically, but whether or no, it is a large number. And I know personally of some students from Asian countries, who are not able to come here because of the current visa situation. And it is certainly going to hurt this university, and it's going to hurt the level of scholarship for everybody, because students don't exist in a vacuum. They don't go to school and just with blinders on and study their things and then go away with that knowledge. They interact with one another. They suggest things to each other. This person has an idea, and that person takes that idea and does something with it. And things grow, and that's where great discoveries come from, and a lot of interesting things happen. And it's suicidal in the long term for this entire country, if not for a lot of the things that have been giving the U.S. its technological edge for all this time, to restrict immigration in the ways that the current administration is doing. Crazy would be a word that comes to mind. I don't know. It's really, really strange, and it just goes to show how bigotry and racism and things like that can blind you to things that you're doing that are actually self-defeating. Keeping out migrant workers really hurts our agricultural sector a great deal, and keeping out scientists and students and things like that hurts our technological sector. I mean, we're hurting ourselves. We're just hurting ourselves left and right with all this these immigration restrictions, and no one is actually being helped by it. It just hurts everyone. The only people that are being helped, I guess, are the politicians who can hold this up, these events up, or these orders up, or whatever they are, and say, look what I've done to keep out those immigrants. I am helping keep America for Americans, or whatever the nonsense that they're doing. So they're just helping themselves in a very limited way, and hurting everyone else in the entire country and themselves. So it's stupid. It's just stupid. It goes beyond being vile and evil. It is just stupid too. Anyway, moving on, because what else can I do? I must move on. So this next story is entitled, Judge Orders ICE to Free Detained Immigrant Children Because of COVID-19. Ooh, some good news. Citing the unrelenting spread of the coronavirus, a federal judge has ordered that all children currently held in U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement custody for more than 20 days must be released by July 17th. U.S. District Judge Dolly G. of California issued this scathing order Friday afternoon, saying the Trump administration had failed to provide even the most basic health protections for children and their families amid the pandemic. She described the ICE-operated facilities as being on fire, adding that there is no more time for half measures. Although the progress has been made, the court is not surprised that COVID-19 has arrived at both the family residential centers and Office of Refugee Resettlement facilities, as health professionals have warned all along, G wrote. The order applies to all 3 of the family detention facilities in the United States. 2 are located in Texas and a 3rd in Pennsylvania, as well as shelters housing unaccompanied minors. As of Thursday, at least 11 people at a family detention center in Karnes City, Texas, have been diagnosed with COVID-19, according to an independent report filed with the order. 4 employees at another facility in Dilley, about 90 miles away, have also tested positive for the coronavirus, and test results for residents there remain pending. Meanwhile, an independent monitor and a physician who inspected ICE's family detention centers reported this month that given the infection rates in the counties where the Texas facilities are located, there is even more cause for concern. Court documents show that as of June 8th, there were 124 children in the 3 detention centers housed alongside family members. Another 507 children were in the Office of Refugee Resettlement Shelters as of June 7th. The order essentially forces ICE to adhere to existing law established in the Flores Agreement, which limits how long minors can be held in ICE custody. Holly Cooper, co-director of the University of California Davis Immigration Law Clinic and one of the attorneys representing Flores Agreement class members, said she is elated by the latest ruling. She said G's decision could lead to the long-awaited release of entire families, some of whom have been living in what she called horrific conditions for more than a year. Until now, ICE has been reluctant to release children held in family detention centers because in order to do it in a humane way, they have to release the child with a parent, Cooper said. Instead, the Trump administration has offered families a binary choice: stay together in detention or allow the children to be transferred to a sponsor or family member somewhere in the United States. The problem is ICE makes a real horrible guardian of children, and so far ICE has opted to keep children detained during a global pandemic, Cooper said. But now, under pressure of the looming July 17 deadline, Cooper said, what we're hoping is that ICE will do the humane thing and not separate any child from their parents, because that's what the children want. That's what our class members want. That's what the advocates want. That's what the parents want. Pretty self-explanatory, I would say. It's just... Sometimes I'm at a loss for words. I mean, at one time I could sort of successfully describe what's going on in a larger sense here. But as we approach the election, and it's still a few months away, but we're getting there slowly but surely, it becomes more of a fraught process to talk about this, because I end up saying, don't vote for this person. But seriously, I mean it. Anyway, moving on. Standoff over emergency funding leaves 13,400 immigration workers facing furlough. Oh, really? In less than 30 days, the cash-strapped U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS, will start furloughing more than 13,400 employees, nearly 70% of its workforce, unless Congress authorizes emergency funding to avoid a scenario that would cripple the nation's legal immigration system. USCIS, which administers green card applications, work permits, asylum requests, naturalization ceremonies for would-be U.S. citizens, and other immigration services, has been facing an unprecedented financial crisis, which it attributes to a drastic decrease in applications during the coronavirus pandemic that has deprived the fee-funded agency of its main source of revenue. I don't think that's the only reason. Anyway, thousands of USCIS employees have already received notices of their looming furloughs, which would start on August 3rd. If that happens, the agency would be left with a skeleton crew that will make it difficult to sustain our critical mission of administering our nation's lawful immigration system. Joseph Edlow, Deputy Director for Policy at USCIS and the de facto head of the agency, said in a statement to CBS News. USCIS, which is a division of the Department of Homeland Security, informed Congress of its financial woes in the middle of May, requesting $1.2 billion in emergency funding and promising to repay the funds by imposing a 10% surcharge on applications. However, in the ensuing weeks, a standoff has emerged between Congress and the Trump administration, leaving a cloud of uncertainty hanging over the USCIS workforce and the millions of immigrants who filed petitions with the agency in any given year. Democratic and Republican congressional officials... Try that again. Democratic and Republican congressional officials said the administration has yet to file a formal budget request, frustrating the lawmakers responsible for authorizing the funds. It's a moving target right now in terms of what specifically it is we need to address in order to prevent these furloughs, Democratic Congresswoman Lucille Roybal Allard, the chair of the House Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee, told CBS News. Everyone is in agreement and focusing on the fact that we're going to prevent these furloughs. But unfortunately, with OMB not taking any action at this time, it is very difficult to sit down and finalize what exactly is needed, she said, referring to the White House Office of Management and Budget. The Trump administration, however, says Congress has all it needs to bail out USCIS. The administration has formally requested the resources necessary to keep USCIS running, an OMB spokesperson told CBS News. Our hope is that congressional Democrats accept our proposal to keep the lights on in a responsible manner. On June 19th, acting OMB Director Russell Vought sent letters to congressional appropriators expressing support for a pay-it-forward deficit-neutral approach to grant USCIS emergency funds. The letters, however, did not specify an amount. Of course not. The Trump White House is responsible for requesting supplemental funding, but all they have sent Congress is a one-page letter that provides virtually no information on the shortfall or proposed remedies, said Evan Hollander, a spokesperson for the House Appropriations Panel. Despite this egregious lack of communication, House Democrats are closely tracking USCIS financial difficulties and are prepared to discuss solutions as part of negotiations on the next phase of coronavirus response legislation. So far, Senate Republicans are unwilling to begin those talks. A Republican Senate aide said House appropriators have not reached out about the USCIS emergency funds. The aide also said the White House has not made a formal request for the funds, noting that Vaught's June 19th letter did not include a dollar figure. Roybal Allard said she and other lawmakers are also asking USCIS to identify the factors, in addition to fewer applications during the pandemic, that precipitated the agency's budget shortfall. Congress has yet to receive a response, she said. COVID is definitely a factor, but I don't believe that is the whole reason that we are in this situation, and that's exactly what we're trying to find out, so that it can be corrected and we don't end up in the same place next year, she said. In May, USCIS attributed the agency's potential bankruptcy to a dramatic drop in applications during the pandemic, predicting that it would see a 61% decline in petition receipts through the end of September. An agency spokesperson said receipts have slightly improved since, but noted that the $1.2 billion request to Congress remained unchanged. There is a consensus among lawmakers, congressional staff, immigration experts, and USCIS employees that the pandemic has had a large impact on the agency's operations and fee-funded model. USCIS had to postpone in-person interviews, fingerprint and photo appointments, naturalization ceremonies, and other services because of the coronavirus. Though some have reopened in a limited capacity, virtually all offices were closed to the public in the spring. The agency has recently conducted smaller naturalization ceremonies, but hundreds of thousands of immigrants seeking to finalize their path to U.S. citizenship are still waiting to complete their postponed appointments. However, there's disagreement over whether the coronavirus is the sole catalyst of USCIS' dire financial predicament. Lawmakers, experts, former USCIS officials, and current employees believe the agency's fiscal crisis had been brewing well before the coronavirus became widespread in the U.S., fueled by the Trump administration's restrictive immigration policies and funding priorities. That's what I was thinking. USCIS publicly forecast a $1.26 billion deficit in November 2019, which is when it proposed fee hikes for a wide range of its services. A recent analysis by the Nonpartisan Migration Policy Institute shows that revenue from petition fees has declined in the past 3 consecutive fiscal years, a trend that ran parallel to dwindling petitions for programs the administration has limited or sought to dismantle entirely. In fiscal year 2019, USCIS brought in $13 million less in fee revenue than in 2018, which had already seen a $152 million drop in petition funds from the previous year. Between fiscal years 2017 and 2019, USCIS has seen a significant drop in petitions for family-based green cards, naturalization, including from U.S. service members, and programs that protect certain immigrants from deportation, like Temporary Protected Status, or TPS, and the Obama-era Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA. The Trump administration has sought to end the TPS and DACA programs, but its efforts have been stymied by the courts. It has also taken unilateral action to restrict family-based immigration, including by imposing a broad wealth test for green cards that is expected to disproportionately affect low-income applicants. Citing the economic impact of the pandemic, President Trump had recently issued 2 sets of restrictions to limit immigrant and work visas. Over the last 4 years, the policies of this administration and the way they ran things pushed the agency to the very edge of a cliff, and COVID was the finger on the back that sent it over. A USCIS employee who requested anonymity to speak freely told CBS News. Another USCIS employee who also requested anonymity and had received a furlough notice agreed, noting the agency recently expanded its fraud detection and national security units. To double the size of a directorate that doesn't actually perform the core function of our agency, which is to adjudicate requests for immigration benefits, is a recipe for financial disaster, the employee told CBS News. USCIS pushed back on this criticism. There is nothing in the budget or the analysis to suggest that there is any drop in our receipts that is outside historical norms based on any policy that has been implemented by this administration, a spokesman said. In fact, the second quarter of fiscal year 2020 was better by $100 million than fiscal year 2019, and far better, $200 million, than it was in 2016, which should illustrate just how far receipts fell in late March forward due to COVID-19. Leon Rodriguez, who led USCIS during President Barack Obama's second term, said the current situation could highlight the value of having some of the agency's offices, like those for processing asylum and refugee requests, transition from a fee-funded model to one appropriated by Congress, because both asylum and refugee work are so bound up with U.S. foreign policy, and the humanitarian and national security strategic objectives of U.S. foreign policy. It makes sense for that to be a shared investment of all the American people, Rodriguez told CBS News. Michael Knowles, an asylum officer and president of the Union for USCIS employees in the Washington, D.C. area, said he doesn't think the American public has fully grasped the consequences of his agency's potential partial shutdown.